This is our Cuba, our factory, our prison, a country governed by a military dictatorship, producer of misery and exile. Here, working is slavery. We all make about $20 a month, so we have to find our own means to survive, as we say here, to resolve, even if it means leaving our values behind to make it to the end of the month. We want to be done with this misery, this repression, this confinement. We want human rights. We want change, and we want it now.
Yo soy Camilo.
My name is Camilo, author, musician, and singer. My band is named Anonymous, because that's how the government wants us. They've arrested me, censored me, but we will fight to make our reality known through our songs, to make our Cuban voices heard.
Nuestras voces cubanas.
Siempre día tras día en mi fábrica, mi cárcel, donde mi sudor enriquece al que me aprisiona aquí. Los frutos de mi trabajo, los frutos de mi dolor, irá primero al bolsillo de aquel que me sometió. Tumbaré mis cadenas, no voy a perder más tiempo. Me escaparé corriendo, quisiera gozar de la vida antes que la mía se apague. Cuando mi vida sea mía, brindaré por mi libertad.
La frase más común, la palabra más común.
The most common phrase, the most common word for Cuban is struggle. We have our own meaning for this word. To us it means to steal, defraud, or get things illegally. When a Cuban says he's struggling, it means that he's trying to steal from the state because his salary doesn't allow him to support himself or his family to have a decent life in this country.
Para poder mantenerse a sí mismo y a su familia y poder tener una vida decente en este país.
What we call struggling and you call stealing is a necessity. It's about survival.
I would say that 90% of this country is in survival mode because they don't have enough money to survive, either to repair his home. He's obligated to wait for the government, who's always blaming the embargo and doesn't have the needed answers for this country, which gets worse every day.
Here in Cuba, everything is uncertain because Cubans are used to living one day at a time. They do not know what will happen tomorrow. It is like this because every day a new law could be imposed. The future is truly uncertain here.
Not long ago, we could not buy a car legally. We could not buy a house legally. We could not enter the airport legally, own a mobile phone legally, or carry foreign currency, either own a computer, and all this affects 100% of Cubans.
100% de todos los cubanos.
La gran mayoría tenemos hijos.
The majority of us have children and our wages are not enough. Prices are very high because of this system and its lifestyle imposed here. We do not have enough basic necessities. When it is not one, it's the other. And when we search for another way to find them, the police makes problems for us.
La policía arremete contra uno.
Any foreigner sees it and says, practically laughing, how do you survive with only $12 a month?
Mensual. Cuando vivir es luchar y un sufrimiento, cuando cada día ganas una miseria y un futuro sin luz.
As much as I work, the money just isn't enough to live or even to survive.
I earn $8 a month working. For $8, I work 8 hours a day for 30 days.
The most exploited workers in South America are the Cubans.
El 70% de los trabajos en Cuba son estatales.
70% of the jobs in Cuba are for the state with its miserable salary. When a Cuban successfully gets a job outside the country, the company or the foreign government has the obligation to pay the wages not to the Cuban worker, but directly to the regime, who take 90%, leaving only 10% of the salary to the worker, as is for all cases of Cubans who work outside. Otherwise, they would not be able to leave the country. It's a real slavery.
Es una real esclavitud.
Personas que puedan vivir en Cuba de manera.
In Cuba, few are those who can live without worrying about money.
Son pocos. Los militares.
The military, the singers, the government, but the population?
La población.
Cuba, muchas cosas que.
Many things that developed countries take for granted, in Cuba, require great effort here.
Cuestan esfuerzo.
¿Usted sabe cuánto tiene la?
Do you know how much this grandmother's pension is? Less than $2.
Para los ojos del mundo todo está bien, cuando la realidad es otra.
In the eyes of the world, everything is fine, but the reality is very different. When there's no money, no economy, when you aren't given the possibility of living freely, of traveling.
Donde no puedes viajar.
Los niños de Cuba no le dan nada extra para los fines de año.
Children in Cuba receive nothing as a gift on New Year's Day, as the parents must buy them. But with that $8 that I earn, what a retired grandmother can do. These are the things that make people live like they are condemned. Internally, I hope one day my country will change.
Un día mi país cambiara.
No puedes
We cannot buy what we need because our salary is not enough. It's not enough for food or for a pair of shoes, which the state sells for $25 or $30 while they pay us less than that.
Cuando uno trabaja a tiempo completo y nada a cambio puede obtener más que la pobreza. El maldito sistema que nos aplasta por nuestro bienestar lo debemos cambiar, lo debemos cambiar. ¿Por qué los dirigentes van a las tiendas y compran?
Why can the leaders go to the market and buy 80 bags of groceries while the population cannot? I'd also like to go shop at the market and that my grandchildren could eat better for at least a month.
Tell me, in Cuba, it's not easy to buy, for example, apple or bananas?
No, an apple is only sold in cook money, tourist money, and can cost about a day's work. But this isn't new. My mother went through it when she was young. My son went through it, and it's nothing because there were worse times. Eating beef in Cuba is the unattainable dream of many. There is a very strict law against killing cows for their meat. You can go to jail longer for having killed a cow than for killing a person.
Serious? How many years of jail for killing a cow?
I know someone who was in for 15 years. In Cuba, we have a saying for the long daily waiting lines. It is said, when we wait more than a lot, here we wait in lines to death. And it also makes you lose something precious called time. Time that an individual, a citizen, could spend studying, speaking, learning empathy, knowledge, protesting.
Those above us have no idea how people really live.
Many of them have 2 or 3 mentions, and the state claims that they are the ones who run the country. But what's in it for those who have worked their entire lives for this country?
Señores, importante, yo sé que molesto, pero quiero hacerme escuchar. Soy uno entre millones en la lucha en la calle. Para ustedes, yo soy nada.
Los dirigentes de la revolución son básicamente.
The leaders of the revolution are of another social class that benefits from the privilege it holds over the rest of the country.
Ciudadanos del país.
Because they were put in power by the state, and it is they who submitted the country like this. I'm 58 years old, and I have worked my entire life. I have no criminal record. I have never done anything illegal, but I would like my country to change, so that me and my family's lives can change too. Right now, we can't.
Con un salario de $20 al mes.
With a $20 monthly salary, it's impossible for us to repair or maintain our homes. For every heavy rainfall, roofs and floors collapse. Often, people are found injured or dead. We must then live, if not in the streets, in a place called Solar, where the entire family lives in a single room, in a building with only one bathroom that is in poor condition and shared with all the people in the building.
Baño de mala condición, compartido por todos los habitantes.
Señores, importante, en la pobreza nos quieren cuando esta realidad va a cambiar. Desde siempre ustedes nos han obligado a entregar nuestra vida y más. Colosal es su mansión de 30 cuartos sin incluir los del perro. En ese inmenso ciudad con guardias, solo más grande es su orgullo. Cambiemos ese mundo injusto y desigual y al fin podremos vivir con tranquilidad.
Cada vez que hay un evento o una manifestación con el fin de
For every event or protest, in order to spread their propaganda, the regime forces Cuban workers and students to march, chanting,
¡Viva Fidel! ¡Viva la revolución! Ese adoctrinamiento comienza en el círculo infantil.
This indoctrination begins in kindergarten, then in school, at university, and continues in the workforce. If you refuse to participate, you will be fired from work or from university. After that, you are forbidden to work by yourself and earn money. Imagine the pressure we face to be or at least pretend to be in favor of the system. In Cuba, we call that the double morality.
En Cuba a eso lo llamamos la doble moral.
¿Qué educación quieren para sus hijos?
What kind of education do people want for their children? Because it is unacceptable, disturbing, and even scary that a state should have such an absolute control and power over the lives of our children.
De nuestros hijos. Se utilizó a menores que fueron sacados de sus
They use minors by taking them out of school and drag them along to supposed cultural and sport activities which ultimately have repressive purposes. Then, the children are surrounded by political police officers disguised as civilians who most of the time physically abuse peaceful citizens in front of those children.
Sobre ciudadanos pacíficos delante de esos niños.
They take the children, put them on a bus or whatever is passing by, and bring them to these activities without the parents' permission.
La autorización de los padres.
Escapamos, pobrecitos vulnerables. Ellos hablaron de un futuro mejor. Pensé en contar mientras en manos a la patria cantaban. Mi alma confía a ellos. Mas la política siempre esconde la verdad y manipula al pueblo.
La educación cubana es buena en papeles.
The Cuban education system looks good on paper, but its application is terrible.
Teachers don't know anything.
Because they're almost younger than me. They still make basic spelling errors. I mean, please.
Le puedo decir que yo he llegado a donde estoy.
I can tell because I'm in my first year of university and primary school mathematics are causing me problems.
Mathematics that a primary school student should know.
I'm not saying everyone is like me, but I've asked around and the majority are in the same situation as me. They don't know the basics. And if the basics are taught poorly, you can't follow what comes next. So education system is good in theory, like everything here in Cuba.
Yes, the revolution and socialism is good in theory, on paper.
La base de la revolución cubana es eso, teoría.
El socialismo es bueno en teoría, en papeles.
El famoso bloqueo.
The famous embargo, another reason that the regime uses to justify the current state of poverty in Cuba, blaming everything on the evil Yankee government. Only few know, but the politics of the United States towards Cuba are wanted, created, and directed by Cubans residing in the United States. It's the fight of our brothers over there who used their political power to put pressure in order to bring freedom to Cuba. The real painful embargo in Cuba is within the island. An embargo of the regime against the improvement of the Cuban citizens.
Régimen contra el desarrollo del pueblo cubano.
No hay tanta comida. Estamos un país bloqueado.
There isn't enough food for everyone. It's because of the embargo. Public transport is bad. It's because of the embargo. There aren't enough school supplies. It's because of the embargo. I believe that Cuba's government does not want to lift the embargo because they use it to justify everything that goes wrong.
Como excusa de todo lo que está pasando.
Cuando la oposición cubana informen a los colegas de esos congresistas cubanoamericanos que hay una transición democrática ya encaminada en Cuba, el embargo se acaba.
When the Cuban opposition announces to their fellow Cubans in North America that a democratic transition is on its way to Cuba, the embargo ends immediately. We've set conditions to lift the embargo and the economic sanctions. The following 3 steps. 1, the release of all political prisoners. 2, the legalization of other political parties, freedom of press, and labor unions. 3, a call for free elections for the people of Cuba. When this happens in Cuba, the embargo will end.
Cuando eso suceda en Cuba, el embargo termina.
Estoy súper mal, discursos infectados, les seguí con frenesí. Hoy con la fila miserable entendí que esta gente me adoctrinó. Estamos maltratados por la mentira, lastimados por la mentira, ahogados por la mentira. Dios, se fue la ilusión.
Cuando hablamos de la historia de Cuba, hablamos de una historia.
When we talk about the history of Cuba from the last 60 years, we're talking about 10,000 state murders, arbitrary executions, several judicial, many others non-judicial, like my father's case.
El caso de mi padre durante 60 años, ¿no? Hablamos también de un presidio político de...
We're also talking about political prisoners. About 100,000 people have been to prison during the last 60 years. Dozens of them are still in jail right now as we speak. We're talking about thousands of people who lost their lives, escaping by sea, fleeing this reality.
La realidad que se vive.
Al gobierno cubano le molesta mucho.
The Cuban government hates that someone with information on human rights violations might obscure or break the image of paradise exported by official propaganda. The government of Cuba has set up what it calls the Truth Operation. The Truth Operation attacks independent bloggers, obstructs people, groups, or organizations who think differently than the government by disguising an agent as a blogger of the revolution or troll for hacking websites. My website has just been hacked these past few days.
En hackear sitios. Mi sitio acaba de estar hackeado hace unos días.
We will shut down their websites. They can make a scandal. Okay, that's good. Here, everyone censors.
Aquí todo el mundo censura.
It's very difficult because, first of all, we live in a country where the information broadcasted is often a lie, where the independent media are censored, where journalists can go to jail, just like the 25 who were put behind bars during the Black Spring, with 75 human rights activists. A country where our website is blocked on all national servers, where we cannot interview a minister, where it's impossible to ask for an interview with the current president.
Ya no me siento libre porque yo tengo que tener cuidado con lo que...
I do not feel free. I have to be careful about what I write in a message on the internet. I do not feel comfortable browsing the internet because they can see everything I do.
Tienen acceso a todo lo que yo reviso en internet.
Libertad de expresión, no.
Freedom of speech, no. It's like being a prisoner. It's a shame, but I do not feel free. I don't, because there are a lot of things I'd like to do, like making my music heard in other parts of the world, and it's very hard to do that, to travel.
Es bastante difícil poder hacerlo, poder viajar.
Las elecciones pasadas, en un lugar aquí de La Habana, hubo un disidente que fue...
In the past elections, in a neighborhood in Havana, a dissident managed to run in one of the districts, and he actually received the most support from voters. And obviously someone else won. A female colonel retired from the army. We've never had free elections in Cuba. Because I don't know if you're aware, but simply expressing an opinion against the leaders of the revolution is a crime here, a criminal offense. I don't agree with it at all, nor my freedom of speech, which I know I don't have.
Eso no me cuadra mucho con mi libertad de expresión, o sea que sé que no la tengo.
Nunca se han sometido.
They have never submitted themselves to free elections.
A elecciones libres. Bueno, está ahí la famosa frase de Fidel Castro de elecciones para qué.
Fidel Castro's famous saying, elections? What for? They were always afraid of the Cuban people. They were never confident of having the sympathy of the citizens, and they do not have it.
Ciudadanía y no la tienen.
My country's government disguises itself and hides behind a supposed left-wing ideal, a supposed socialism, a supposed economic and equal model for politics, where there are possibilities for everyone. But what it hides behind is a vulgar totalitarianism, for which it is not worth analyzing its political colors. It's a dictatorship.
En Cuba seguimos sufriendo la peor situación de derechos humanos en toda América Latina.
In Cuba, we've suffered the worst human rights situation in all Latin America. The Cuban people are handcuffed by their hands and feet and exposed to a regime that has a huge capacity for intimidation over each person, through a huge system of repression. In March, there were over 1,000 people detained, temporarily, for several days, several hours. Some are still in prison. We are in the presence of a very similar regime to Italian fascism, a kind of corporate state behind which there is no ideology. They call themselves communists, but it is an alibi.
no hay ideología detrás. Dicen ser comunistas, pero eso es una coartada.
Y eso ocasiona trauma.
That's causing us traumas, hurting us on a sociological level. A kind of defense syndrome is acquired, which is to think that nothing can be done, that we are not strong enough, or that it is not in our hands to change our reality. They have been very good at selling their lies, supplanting all the realities that Cubans live through, concealing the terror and the pain of the Cuban people.
Suplantando cualquier realidad que vivan los cubanos, escondiendo el terror, escondiendo el dolor del pueblo cubano. Y en algún momento en América Latina se hablaba.
And at some point, Latin America and almost everyone spoke of Cuba as the island of freedom, while ironically at the same time, they were sending the supposedly free young Cubans to forced labor camps for growing their hair long, for listening to the Beatles, for going to church, for becoming leaders, for writing poetry, for being a homosexual, being religious, or only having any alternative form of expression from the regime. They ended up in a forced labor camp.
Del régimen terminabas en un campo de trabajo forzado.
The essence of the problem is that the Cuban government does not recognize the human rights of Cuban citizens in Cuba. This is called tyranny. This is oppression. And this is why the majority of Cubans suffer, being poor. They have no vision of their future in Cuba, and that is why they want to leave the country.
Visión de su porvenir en Cuba y por eso quieren salir del país.
Si no tendremos que salir a cualquier lugar mejor, soñando de vivir su vida de una forma diferente. Quisiera en mi país sentirme bien, tu futuro disfrutar. No me dejes solo esta noche, cantemos juntos.
Se va casi todo el mundo.
Basically, almost everyone wants to leave because of the economic necessity, the uncertainty, because the wages that are too low, the life that is too hard. Politics can no longer convince them.
Ya la política no los convence.
There are 10,000 ways to leave. A new way to leave this country is created each day. Contracts of employment in Mexico, marriage to a foreigner.
Immigration is a consequence of the economy, and the economy is consistent with those who run the country.
Millones ya se fueron del país. Una de las maneras.
Due to the regime, millions have already left the country in all sorts of ways. One of the saddest ways is to marry a foreigner, even if they are older, fat, ugly, no matter. The priority being to leave the country in all possible ways. The damned regime has taken much from us, even love.
El maldito régimen nos ha quitado hasta.
Obviamente la migración habla muy mal del concepto que se tiene del gobierno cubano.
Immigration reflects badly on the concept of governance adopted by the Cuban government. It shows lack of confidence in the government. If I believe that the situation in Cuba could improve, why would I immigrate? To those for whom family is important, leaving their children behind, their spouse, their parents, without knowing if they're going to see them again? When someone takes all those risks, it's because it's the best option.
Considera realmente de que es la mejor opción.
Si te vas a ir, vete y no vires, porque si te cogen.
If you leave, do not come back, because if they catch you, you will never move an inch again. Just ask the baseball players or anyone who tried and failed to escape the country. You are persecuted until you feel suffocated.
Una vez el régimen fusiló a 3 jóvenes que intentaron.
One time, the regime executed 3 young people who just tried to leave by sea. Another time, they killed 40 people, mainly women and children.
Los balseros no eran.
The balseros, they live on makeshift boats made with old truck tires.
De camión.
Truck tires and collapsed house debris.
Esa era la vía principal.
That was the main way to emigrate from Cuba. People needed something that could float, and they headed out to sea to get to the other side. But not everyone made it to shore. Many have died.
Muchas personas murieron.
Tengo que partir al norte, donde me espera el frío. Tendría que estirar el tiempo, quedarme más en tu calor. Extrañaré a mis amigos, los a diario. Tengo que partir al norte. Guardarás tú mi corazón. Llevar tu amor como mi abrigo. Y matar así el frío. Te extrañaré, mi pueblo querido. Tú que luchas a diario.
Last week on my blog, I published an interview with one of these web soldiers who realized what he was doing and switched to the critic side. He was telling me about his experience. I had to attack you, but I could not read you. They forbade me to read you.
This is impressive.
Impressive because I believe that humans can be converted. If this man managed to convert, why can't the other soldiers of the web do it too?
A los que actúan en favor y defienden ese gobierno.
To those who still defend this dictatorial government because they're victims of its propaganda, its lies, or for professional reasons thinking they're just doing their job, I say, brother, when you're ready, your freedom also awaits. I'm sure one day your eyes will be open and you will choose another way, because now we're all equally poor. We all want a decent salary and a better life for our families. Please, do not participate further in that system.
Por favor, no participe más en ese sistema.
Sigue el viento que sopla un aire de cambio. Nada ahora será igual. Después de haberlo deseado y de esperarlo, por fin llegará el gran cambio. Ya es hora.
Este síndrome de indefensión adquirida que padecemos muchos cubanos.
This acquired defense syndrome, from which many Cubans suffer, is the only reason why the regime is still in power. This and also fear and repression.
Y la represión, un sistema.
A totalitarian system is maintained through fear and by making people believe that they are incapable of change.
Que no es capaz del cambio.
Queremos votar sin manipulación, a decir sí o no. Seguimos así, eso se llama un plebiscito. Que Cuba decide.
Cuba decide es una campaña de movilización ciudadana.
Cuba Decides is a citizen mobilization campaign. The technical element of the campaign, the cause we are promoting, is the realization of a plebiscite. The plebiscite is not only a way to generate the possibility of a civilized and peaceful transition, but also an open door that prevents other doors from opening. No other door could be better for the Cubans. Laws cannot be changed by the government alone. It's not the only entity with the potential to change things. Citizens must be able to participate in order to start the transition. That's why we say yes to free elections, in order for change to come and be done by the Cubans. Just ask the Cubans.
Pregúntale a los cubanos.
El poder lo tiene el pueblo, estamos listos, ya es hora para el cambio. Joven, adulto, abuelo, todos unidos, ya es hora para el cambio.
Mis amigos en la comunidad internacional me decían, ¿Cuba está cambiando?
My friends from the international community asked me, is Cuba changing? Has the Cuban perestroika really begun? It's very unfair to pretend and to play that game. There was no opening process in Cuba. Not a single step was made by the regime in favor of the recognition of rights. Not a single step was made by the Cuban regime. Repression has not diminished, it has increased in many aspects within the island. And these are the friends of the international community from who we need strong support for the real opening. And the real opening is from Cuban regime to Cubans.
Y la apertura es real, es de Cuba a los cubanos.
Y la vida será bella sin la contaminación del sistema malo que nos esclaviza. Y la vida será bella, cada niño podrá soñar, así viviremos sin miedo.
Concrete changes in my society? I've not seen any changes.
Changes in my life. Nothing has changed.
Pueden decir muchos cambios, muchas aperturas, pero a mí...
In this country, you can talk about change, talk about opening. It doesn't solve anything for me to have access to internet if I have no money to connect. If I go to connect on a state Wi-Fi and that internet costs me $2 per hour, if I earn $15 a month, do not eat any food, and do not spend any money, I could connect to the internet for 7 hours per month.
7 horas internet al mes.
Realmente. Yo no he visto ninguna mejora.
I have truly not seen any improvement because sure they fixed some streets, but it was a facade. We are actually in even more trouble.
Estamos más mal.
Those who had money will now have more. The rich will be richer and the poor will be poorer.
Y el pobre se hace más pobre.
Y esto lo digo por los que dicen que los turistas de Estados Unidos.
I say to those who claim that tourists from the United States will bring change to Cuba, Canadian or Spanish tourists before them did not bring change. In fact, this is an offense to the Cuban people. Tourists will not bring about change by drinking daiquiris and mojitos, strolling on our beaches.
Por nuestras playas.
Turistas del mundo, amigos de Cuba, cuando vengan aquí de viaje, ustedes podrían ayudarnos mucho.
Tourists from all around the world, friends of Cuba. When you come to Cuba on a trip, you must help us by not using hotels and state services. Boycott them. The magic word is particular, which signifies in Cuba the private sector. Tourists who come to Cuba using casa particular, restaurant particular, taxi particular are using the real economy of the people, the only economy that helps us. To stay at any resort or hotel in Cuba directly participates to the violent servitude of the Cuban people, because minimum 51% of the money you spend goes directly into the pockets of Raul Castro's family, who in turn uses this money to mistreat the population in order to maintain that good family business, as if Cuba were its own factory, its family farm. Tourists of the world would never accept what's going on here in their own countries. You have to support us in our dream of freedom and prosperity.
Hay que apoyarnos en nuestro sueño de libertad y de prosperidad.
El mundo avanza a pasos agigantados.
The world is making terrific progress. The world is moving forward. Cuba will either hop on board or remain the same with its past 100 years of underdevelopment. If there's something wonderful in Cuba, it is that we live wonderfully with nothing. It's the only wonderful thing in Cuba.
Es la única maravilla que tuve en Cuba.
If people would protest, yes, there could be change.
They must protest for change for those higher up to hear them.
Sal a la calle, ponle ritmo, muestra al mundo lo que quieres. Suelta tu cuerpo para que el deseo caliente tu sangre. Qué rico será el sabor de la libertad. Hay que moverse, hay que moverse.
Lo que pasa que también este tipo de sistemas.
What happens is that this kind of system, when it comes to an important moment, is hopeless, like the one it's facing right now. Those of the revolution generation are coming to the end of their lives. Desperate, they could be capable of all kinds of things.
Pueden ser capaces de cualquier cosa.
De hecho, yo creo que puede salir muy mal. Yo creo que las cosas se pueden poner violentas.
In fact, I think it could be very bad. I think it could become violent. The regime could become worse, even more criminal, more corporate military, because of their ties with Colombo, Venezuelan drug traders, or with Russia or Iran. Fights could happen in the future between Cuban generals. Many of them, not all, but many are criminals. They defend their own economic interests. They are in business with global criminal groups. What could happen can be very ugly for Cubans and for the continent.
Lo que puede pasar es feo para los cubanos y para el continente.
Si la transición cubana sale mal,
If the Cuban transition isn't done properly, expect a difficult century for Latin America. If it goes well and we show the world that we can govern ourselves, that we can live in democracy, that we can accept plurality and difference, it would be an important sign. The international organizations have a lot of responsibilities. They allow themselves to be held down by the regime's official discourse, to have their hands tied by the Cuban diplomacy, and they abandoned us many times, we, the people, the activists and the dissidents.
Pueblo, los activistas, los disidentes.
La comunidad internacional está llamada a apoyar.
The international community is being called to support us because the Cuban regime was never elected by the Cuban people.
por la ciudadanía cubana.
Who has more power in your country now? Designated President Díaz-Canel or Alejandro, son of Raúl Castro?
Hijo de Raúl. Me inclino a pensar.
I think the family clan, the Castros, hold the hard power, the real power.
La violencia, la impunidad con la que el régimen se está manejando es cada vez peor.
The violence and impunity under which the regime operates is greater each time. They say they want to crush the opposition completely, and they have no limits. I think it's very important, and I reiterate, that the international community and Cubans in exile must pay attention to what's happening on the island now. We need Cuba to be a prosperous nation, and this demand from the Cuban people cannot be ignored and postponed.
No puede ser postergada.
Ya es hora.
The time has come. The regime is weaker. He's afraid, because there is a new growing movement in Cuba. Now, people do not shut up. People scream. People talk about freedom, about rights, about a better life, especially at each Wi-Fi point of the country, where it is possible and easy because it's legal to go there to talk, to connect, so people without worry, without fear, enjoy this time to share, to think, and to plan for having a life that is going to be ours.
Una vida que sea nuestra.
Y nosotros decimos, ¿por qué no elecciones libres? Mi candidato es el cambio.
We ask, why is there no free election? My candidate is called change, and that's who I want to vote for. I want Cubans to elect men and women who are agents of change, because who could be better than the people in a democracy at ensuring justice? It has to be a single-party system? Who created this party? One single governor, one family, who is now uniquely capitalist? We demand respect for the people of Cuba, solidarity with the people of Cuba, with what the people of Cuba want. Reconciliation, peace, freedom, and respect for human rights. That all people support this wish, which will soon be a general demand, because human rights are universal, and no one can deny the obligation of human solidarity from all men of good faith for the people of Cuba. Because we're human beings too, in case you hadn't realized.
Nosotros también somos seres humanos. No sé si se han enterado.
Yes, I am afraid of dying, because they could put a bullet in me. They could make me lose a tire or run me over when I'm on my bicycle with one of those political police cars.
Más allá de la senda, las fronteras y el mar, ella te salvará si respondes